Welcome to today's webinar, the 21 Days in Israel and the Challenge and Cost of Getting to Yes. The session will feature a discussion, an interview, if you will, with Abe Silverman, who I've known a few years. But before I begin, let me give you a little bit of color, and I'm taking this from memory and recall that Abe spent some of his youth in a camp, whether it was a concentration camp or not. We'll probably get some color in that regard. And most of his youth he spent, I think, on a farm in Saskatchewan. He immigrated to St. Albert, if that's what you would call immigration, and operated an automotive junkyard here. That's where I probably met him the first time without knowing that it was the beginning of a rather long-term relationship. He was I guess, CEO, chief pilot, president, probably founder of Global Aircraft, operating out of Villeneuve and flying aircraft from the Middle East here into Alberta. That makes him a global, our roving reporter for the globe. So, Abe, tell me, what did I get wrong? Who really are you? See if you can give us some more color. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's go back to where I was born. And I was born in a Jewish ghetto in a city in northeastern Romania. The city is called Iași, Romania, or Jassy, if you're, I guess, pronouncing it in English. It was a city of 35,000 Jews that was herded into an area that normally housed 5,000 Jews. When we were liberated, my mother was taken in by a family who had taken in 15 other people as well. My father had been taken away 3 months earlier to a slave labor camp in Basrabia. And it was through the kindness and the heroism of many of the other people in that house that kept my mother and me alive. So we were liberated in 1944. My dad was also liberated. He was only one of he was one of 700 of the 3,500 young Jewish men in that slave labor camp who survived. And after he recovered, back to work, he decided he didn't want to live under communism. We escaped out of Romania, traveled by ox cart mostly through Hungary, and wound up in a refugee camp in Vienna in 1947. My brother was born in 1946, and we waited for passage to Palestine, but because of British embargoes, we weren't allowed to leave, and no one else wanted us. Most countries in the world were not taking in Jews, either before, during, or after the war, or at least not in great numbers. So we were waiting for passage to Palestine because the embargo, of course, that didn't happen. In 48, when Israel became a state, we were moved to Bremen to get on board a ship to go to the new state of Israel, and it was discovered that I had tuberculosis, which was not uncommon in camp kids, and I was sent by the Jewish Agency to a convent in Switzerland at the age of 6, separated from my family for 6 months. And while I was there, and my dad's aunt, who had come to Canada with other members of my dad's family in 1907, found my dad through the Red Cross in Vienna and brought us all to Canada. I grew up on a Jewish farming colony in Saskatchewan, near the little hamlet of Hoffer, Saskatchewan, and left home in 1960. Met my wife in 1962. Got married in 64. Came to visit my parents in Edmonton, who had moved from the farm to Saskatoon and then to Edmonton. My dad was a kosher butcher. While my wife and I and our newborn daughter were here visiting my mother and dad, I met a guy by the name of Jack Cohn. He said that he needs me, and I had to move. So I moved my family to Edmonton in 1966, and the rest is history.
So your involvement with Global Aircraft, give me a little bit of color there.
So I started I went into my own business in 1969. A Texaco rep showed up at the front counter at Just Auto Parts, and I looked after him. I think he bought a carburetor. I guess I impressed him, and he said to me, "You should be a Texaco retailer." And I said, "What the hell's a Texaco retailer?" And he explained to me what it was, and 3 weeks later, my family and I were trained to Winnipeg so I could attend Texaco school, and took over Britannia Texaco on 107th Avenue and 156th Street in March of 1969. And then I started Advanced Auto Parts with my partner, Alec Davis. That didn't work out. Central Truck and Auto Parts with a fellow I worked for in Winnipeg, Max Bronstein. And then because I needed parts for my airplane, I started Global Aircraft in 1983. Yeah, 1983 in Vilnius, and sold it in 1917, 2017, sorry. And today I work full-time for the oldest human rights organization in Canada, established in 1875. Next year, we're celebrating 150 years, and that's B'nai B'rith Canada. And I must say, I'm blessed not only with family and great friends, but also with an important job that I get up in the morning and attack with enthusiasm. However, right now it's very difficult because of the events of the Middle East. Anti-Semitism is running rampant, and every day I'm faced with issues that involve hate against Israel and the Jewish people, and it's dangerous hatred. It's hatred that is so embedded in the psyche of so many that violence is becoming norm against Jewish Jewish people throughout the world. And if you would have asked me on October the 6th, if after 2,000 years we're Jews finally safe in this world, I would have probably said, yeah, I think after 2,000 years we're probably safe. And on October the 7th, I couldn't say that we're no longer safe.
Well, we were seeing on the 6th, or up to that point, some reconciliation with Egypt and Saudi Arabia seemed to be in line, but without getting into that too early, tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about your journey that started in November, your 21-day journey in Israel. Why did you go, and what was that experience all about?
So I went because I felt a strong need to show my solidarity with the Israeli people and my family. I have a large family in Israel. Those that survived the Holocaust went to Israel. My family, we sort of got sidetracked because of my tuberculosis. But can I click on garbage?
Yeah, you've got some.
So, I felt that I should be there for my family and the Israeli people, and of course, my being there didn't go unnoticed. People were very grateful. There was no one traveling to Israel at that time. There's no one, or very few people are traveling to Israel right now as well. Mind you, most of the hotels are occupied by residents of southern Israel along the Gaza border. Most of them won't go back until the wars there, and of course, northern Israel as well has been evacuated, or much of it's been evacuated because of the constant shelling and rocket fire from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So many of the hotels are full, and it's hard to find a hotel room. But nevertheless, Israelis want us to be there. They want the world community to come and show their solidarity and support of what it is that they're having to deal with right now.
So when you mentioned the shelling, this shelling increased dramatically. I mean, with the invasion. But that shelling was not new. Israel has been exposed to shelling for some time. The world now may or may not be aware or may not even be paying attention to the fact that while the thing exploded on the 7th, this has been going on for years. Or am I wrong about that?
Well, the rocket and missile fire out of Gaza started after all of the Jews were evacuated. There was 8,000 Jews who had made their home in Gaza and communities in Gaza for 25 years. And in 2005, the government decided, because it took an entire division of IDF soldiers to protect these people, they decided to evacuate all of the Jews out of Gaza, which they did in 2005, 2006. Some of those Jews were forcibly removed. They didn't want to leave their homes, and shortly after that, the Hamas took control of Gaza. They killed the Fatah leadership that was to rule Gaza after the IDF left and the Jews left. Hamas violently took over Gaza, and they've been firing rockets into Israel ever since.
Okay, well, that was a point I wanted to make. Now, you mentioned rule. I mean, were they not elected by the people of Palestine?
So after they seized control from Fatah, which is the political arm of the Palestinian Authority, they did what was well. It, they the world was told that they were going to hold democratic elections, and Hamas won overwhelming majority in those elections. Those elections were not monitored. However, we have good reason to believe that the majority of Palestinians did vote for Hamas. So they seized Gaza violently, but they then got legitimacy because they held what they sold to the international community as free and democratic elections. They haven't had an election since 2008.
Well, things are rather unstable to consider any election would draw people out to the voting booths, but that's another story, and we'll have to watch things unfold in the coming years to see where it's headed. Where do you think we're going? I mean, you're clearly seeing a reaction worldwide that's bipolar in nature. Those that are sympathetic to the underdog, whether Israel is considered the underdog, or the Palestinian people are considered the underdog, one way or another. We're seeing a bipolar world. South Africa steps in to take Israel to court for genocide. And if genocide wasn't underway from the other party during those lead-up years, I don't know what you would call it. But this getting to zero or getting to yes that I've used in the title is about how often Israel has made offers to try and come to some degree of reconciliation, and where the other party, being passive-aggressive, has no other response other than no. How do we get to yes?
So first of all, let me make it clear. Israel's not at war with the Palestinian people. This war that's going on right now is with Hamas and to a lesser extent Islamic Jihad, both of them that are recognized terrorist organizations by much of the free world. So we have no issues with the Palestinian people. It's Hamas and Islamic Jihad that has to be destroyed. Israelis are not going to go back to their homes near the Gaza border until Hamas has been destroyed. The efforts to recover the hostages that are still alive and the bodies as well, Israel, both are just as precious to Israel, is ongoing. There's been many efforts to try and negotiate deals with Hamas in exchange for letting out prisoners in Israel who've been tried and convicted of attempted murder by the thousands was offered to Hamas. The Hamas leadership was offered safe passage out of Gaza, And so far, there's been nothing no offer that's been made that will entice Hamas to release the remaining hostages. So where is this going? Uh, Israel is a very divided country. It suffers from the same types of issues and many more that most of the democratic nations around the world suffer from. The polarization to the far left and the far right, and then of course the center, which struggles to maintain some degree of relevancy. That's also going on in Israel. So the only issue that is the Israelis and much of the Jewish world, there's no division. It's the need to destroy Hamas, just as the Allies had to destroy Nazi Germany and the idea of National Socialism and destroy the Japanese Empire. That is now the task and the goal of the Israeli military. Hamas must be destroyed. And those who insist that Hamas is not only an organization, it's an idea, forget that Nazis were also an idea, and so was the Japanese Empire. But we did manage to destroy those ideas, maybe not eradicate it, but to at least destroy them as a relevant force in the world. And that's what Israel needs to do with Hamas. Must be destroyed as a relevant force. And then the world is going to have to develop a similar plan like the Marshall Plan, rebuild Gaza. That needs to be done. People's homes have to be rebuilt. And the IDF will remain in Gaza for the foreseeable future. There, no more will Israelis tolerate indiscriminate rocket fire from the Gaza territory into Israel. That's no longer. It doesn't matter how much the United Nations or the world screams and hollers and what have you. That's not going to happen. Then, hopefully, we'll see some sort of a new leadership that will come out of the Palestinian community in Gaza. Hopefully, one that will finally utter the 9 little words that we've been looking for Palestinians to speak since 1948. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Until those 9 little words are uttered, there's virtually no chance that we can have peace between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors. We will have peace between Israel and Arab nations. We have the Abraham Accords, and they will be expanded. There is a strong reason to believe that what happened on October the 7th had something to do with Saudi Arabia being on the verge of joining the Abraham Accords, and Iran wanted to undermine that, and probably was successful in doing it for now. But Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords, and little by little, so will other Muslim nations, and the Palestinians will realize that they are isolated, and hopefully will come to their senses and finally say yes instead of no, as they've done consistently since 1937. And a two-state solution was offered for the first time by the British mandate after the Peel Commission recommended the two-state solution to deal with the violence that was happening between the Jewish residents of Palestine and the Arab residents of Palestine. Then, of course, the partition plan in 1947 and the 3 famous no's and Khartoum in 1967 by the Arab League. No negotiations, no recognition, and no peace. Then, of course, 2000 in Camp David, with Clinton writes in his book, Arafat was for 14 days and said no to everything. In 2008, when Mahmoud Abbas said no, So, yes, we need the Palestinians to say, yes, we recognize that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people where everybody, all Israeli citizens, Arab, Jew, Christian, Baha'i, are equal under the law. Uh, the only the only law that Israel has is a law of return, which is unique to the Jewish people, and that simply is because Israel will not refuse entry of any Jewish people anywhere in the world that is facing hatred and anti-Semitism and annihilation. So that's the only law in Israel that is different for the Jews than anybody else. Otherwise, the the lie of Israel being an apartheid state is not only it's libelous. It's not only a lie. It's libelous. Israel is one of the most liberal democracies in the world. Uh, Arabs serve in the parliament, Israeli parliament. They serve in the courts as judges. You know that it was an Arab Israeli judge that sent President Katzoff to jail for sexual abuse, for rape. It's unheard of. Can you imagine a Jewish judge in Syria or Egypt, or there is no such thing, sending an Arab president to jail? So it's libelous. And how do you how can you how can anyone justify the word genocide when they refer to the Palestinian people? There was 1.7 million Arabs in what was known at that time the territory of Palestine in 1947. Today, that same landmass has over 6 million uh, Arabs. So, where was the genocide? Who was the genocide conducted against? I mean, it's so ludicrous, and yet so much of the world buys into this these awful lies.
Well, so getting to yes, let's step back into that just for a moment. It's going to require leadership. Now we've got Egypt that has signed the accord. You're probably going to see Saudi Arabia come forth. Most of the countries are relatively neutral in that area regarding the war, other than possibly Iran. Where are we going to find the leadership when this is over?
So Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty back in 1978 when Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem. And that was followed by a peace agreement that was signed with King Hussein of Jordan in 1993. So Israel has had peace agreements and relationships with Arab countries for quite a long time. The Abraham Accords, of course, was 2020. That's the four other Muslim nations signed normalization agreements with Israel. So where are we going? Well, where we're going is hopefully towards peace. Israel wants to live in peace with its neighbor. Israel would like to share its prosperity with its neighbors. Israel is a startup nation. It's one of the most innovative countries in the world and has so much innovation to share with the world, including the Muslim nations. And more Muslim nations understand that, especially those that produce oil, and recognize that they have to move their economies in other directions. Israel is a place that they can go to for innovation. So I'm hopeful for the future, but in the meantime, it's a very difficult time. So but let me please remind everybody that 2024 is nothing at all like the year I was born in 1942. 60 million people died during that time, during the Second World War, including 6 million Jews. And no Jews are being transported by cattle car to gas chambers in 2024, and no one else that I'm aware of is being transported to gas chambers. So we've come a long way. but we still have a long way to go. And we're slowly but surely, hopefully, marching in the right direction. There's bumps along the way, no doubt about it.
Well, look,
And
the cost to get to yes is clearly extraordinary on both sides. And I'm going to open discussion to those that are with us today. And I see Eric writing with a red pen and Tom writing with a green pen. So Eric, I'll let you go first because I'm sure you're either writing down your shopping list or you've got a question or two you want to pose. So Eric, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I have to declare a bias. I'm very much of the view that Hamas is a terrorist organization that needs to be exterminated, similar to the Nazis and that. I spent a whole day at Dachau at the prisoner of war camp. I shared. We had the person doing the legal court cases in Birmingham stayed with us when I was there, and I was doing my master's in 1968, and his name was Colonel John Mountford, and he'd been a prisoner of war, and then he was the guy who had to clean up Belsen, after the war, which I think that tends to color my view. I'm probably very aligned with what Abe's saying on that side. However, I will ask a slightly different question of Abe. Abe, you keep talking about, well, we got to get rid of Hamas and all that, but most of the world, or a lot of the world right now, including the United States, is pushing towards a two-state solution. You want to comment on now? Netanyahu was dead set against that, and I guess part of what I'm asking also is it's going to take leadership, huge leadership, like Perry says, to bring the sides together. But I don't think the current leadership can do that. They're just too strong, including Netanyahu. So what do you think of the two-state organization or two-state solution, or what is the solution?
well, the two-state solution is the solution, and that's been offered over and over again since 1937. But Netanyahu is not alone in stating very clearly that at this time the two-state solution is out of the question. There's no way that Israel is going to agree to a independent state in the West Bank, 5 kilometers from the Tel Aviv, from the Ben Gurion airport, to have the freedom to do what Hamas has been doing since 2006. So a two-state solution now is totally out of the question. There has to be a building of trust, and that trust can only be built and only begin when the Palestinians finally agree that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish nation. Until that happens, there is no leader, even from the left or the right or the center, who's going to agree to a two-state solution. There are steps. There are steps that have to be taken in order to reach that end goal. But today, after what happened on October the 7th, forget it. It's going to be many, many years before a two-state solution is going to be the answer.
You point out to me, Abe, and you might want to elaborate on this. Netanyahu is probably not going to survive after this is over, and the reason being the lack of security to Israel that allowed the 1,200 or resulted in the 1,200 being killed and the hostages being taken. That he will pay that price, and that price will be executed by the Israeli people. That's what you truly believe?
So I was in Los Angeles last week, and I was invited to a wine and cheese party. The former Israel ambassador to the United States, Mike Lauren, was there, and he and I had a long discussion about what is going to happen in Israel once the issue with Hamas has been settled. And he said that the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Staff, the Israeli IDF, the Mossad head, the Shin Bet head, all have taken responsibility for what happened and are ready to resign after an inquiry has been completed after the war is over. Netanyahu has not publicly stated that he will resign, but Michael was of the opinion that he won't have a choice. The buck stops with Netanyahu. What happened on October the 7th was a failure of Israeli leadership, a drastic, terrible failure, and there's no doubt that the leadership as it exists today won't be the leadership that will exist in possibly within the next 12 months.
The word humanitarian is being used on one side right now. It seems to be a new word. It wasn't a word that was being used before October 7th, but now it seems to be used as it relates to the Palestinian people. This makes negotiations or makes getting world sympathy quite complex and rather difficult. How do we communicate with the world at large that we really want to get this thing over? And until Hamas gives up or is gone, what choice do we have?
Well, that's
people die in a war. This is a war. It's hard to reconcile it. Yeah, it's a war that's underway, and people are going to die. And of the 20,000 or whatever the number is, many of those are, of course, Hamas soldiers.
Mainstream media, they talk about 20, 30,000 innocent Palestinians, including 10,000 children dying. And yes, there are innocent Palestinians and Palestinian children that are dying, and that's tragic. And it's tragic for all of us that any child has to die in war, but it is war. And despite all of the efforts, my cousin, who was the prosecutor in Haifa, has a son. Bar Goodman is his name. I had dinner with him. He was on a 48-hour leave, and he is the head of a squad that fights in the tunnels. And the rules of engagement that's been imposed on Israel, the IDF, and on pilots is it's incredible. These young people are fighting with their hands tied behind their back. They have to be so careful when they're targeting terrorists who use the Palestinian people as shields. They target Israeli civilians with rockets and missiles, and they use their own people as human shields. So where did they launch the rockets from? They rocket from schools, apartment blocks, hospitals, and consequently, it makes the fighting very difficult. So, yes, unfortunately, innocent people die. But if you recall, when the Allies firebombed Hamburg and Dresden in order to shorten the war, there were tens of thousands of civilians who died in Germany. And when they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hundreds of thousands of people died to shorten the war. And ultimately, history shows clearly saved lives. So, yes, that is the tragedy of war. The innocents get caught up and die. And unfortunately, we haven't figured out yet as a species how to avoid that tragedy. It's tragic. It's tragic, and what we're inundated today, and we're going to be inundated even more so when we begin to see images of dead Palestinian children in Gaza.
So we can't have a permanent solution then, Abe, for some time. You got to build trust. I understand that a bit. What do you think about then a partial ceasefire to let some of the people outside of that are Palestinian civilians that are in Gaza to get them out of the country? Do you think that's got any merit, or do you think you just got to proceed full bore ahead to eliminate and eradicate Hamas, no matter how many deaths?
Nobody wants to take them. I mean, there was every opportunity for Egypt to open up the Rafah crossing and let a million Palestinians that are down at the Egyptian border into northern Egypt. They could have put up tents there just as easily as they did in Gaza. But Jordan it's almost 70% of Jordanians are Palestinians. Jordan wouldn't take one of them in. The world doesn't. The world doesn't. The Arab world doesn't want the Palestinians. That's the tragedy. So where are they going to go, Eric? You know, they Israel dropped leaflets and sent out messages in northern Gaza telling Palestinians that they better move to the central part of the country because they were going in and rooting out Hamas. And then they dropped pamphlets and sent out messages for them to move from central Gaza to southern Gaza. Now they're dropping pamphlets and sending out messages for them to move back north because they're now going after Hamas in the Rafah area, which is where they are, and that's where the hostages are. So until they've been routed out and destroyed, and hopefully some of the hostages will be saved, the Palestinian people are just being moved from end to end, and it's tragic. And it's tragic because aid is hard to get in. I heard today that the United States is planning to build a port in Gaza to move humanitarian aid that way. Well, they build a port. It's going to become a route for weapons to come in. You know what so much and the leadership doesn't ask is how did Hamas accumulate so much weaponry that they've been able to fight off the fifth strongest army in the world for 5 months? Where did all those weapons come from? Well, again, speaking to Michael Oren, he said that Israel now has some serious issues with members of the Egyptian military who've been paid big dollars to allow the weapons to come in through Egypt, through the Rafah crossing. That's where all the weapons come. And where did they originate? Iran. Iran is the biggest supplier of weapons to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. Iran is the problem in the world today.
I think there's a general recognition of where Iran is in this exercise. I want to come back to the two-Palestinian or the two-state solution. There's a sensitivity that was raised in one of the chat notes that the offer of the two-state solution had with it conditions that were unacceptable. It looked like colonization. Why was the two-state solution not appealing to Palestine?
The reality is that Palestinians do not accept the existence of a Jewish state on what they perceive to be holy Muslim land. So the fact that they say that the conditions were not acceptable to them is absolutely it's a smokescreen. If you recall the two-state solution, the partition plan of 1947 and 1937, the Jewish people were given just a tiny part of the land. The majority of Palestine was given actually to a Bedouin chieftain by the name of Abdullah, who immediately crowned himself king and created the Kingdom of Jordan. That was thanks to the British. But it's just a smokescreen. Whatever they were offered a two-state solution. If they didn't like where the borders were, it was a matter of negotiations. But they were offered 8 times a two-state solution, and they said no 8 times. Often they didn't even say no; they said nothing. So the answer to the question is that they have yet to recognize the existence of a Jewish state in Israel, and that's why there's no two-state solution.
It's interesting you use the phrase saying nothing. Saying nothing is what happens when you're negotiating with a passive aggressive. It sits there and retains power. Maybe it's the only source of power by saying nothing.
Yes.
until such time as the other party just keeps on giving and giving and giving. But saying nothing is in fact a strategy.
It is a strategy, and the Palestinian leadership used that strategy very effectively.
I'm just concerned, that, and I certainly understand all of the Jewish history and the Holocaust and all of that business, but I just see this turning against the Israel state, what's happening there in the Middle East now. And it's not helping them one bit. I think it was Gandhi said that, you keep hitting people with a weapon and they'll never change. It just adds to war. And that's what I wish I could find the quote, but anyway, I'm just concerned that the activities that are going on there now are really counter to what we believe is humanitarian. And I'd never thought in my life I would ever see a Dresden again or a Hiroshima. But, the images we're seeing coming out of there are just so awful that it's not helping Israel right now, I'm sure.
My response, Tom, is that it's not helping Israel. The public relations horror is in fact a horror, no doubt. You can see that by what's happening all over the world, but we haven't been given a choice here. Hamas must be destroyed, and as long as Hamas embeds itself amongst the civilians in Gaza, then we have no choice, and innocents are going to die. And you're wrong about one thing: the firebombing of Dresden and Hamburg, and the atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki did end the war. That's it. Japan stated publicly that they would fight to the last man, and historians will tell you today that if the Americans and Allies would have had to invade the Japanese islands, 500,000 soldiers would have died, and 2 million Japanese civilians would have died. So sometimes war is the only answer.
Yeah, no, I just don't see that. I see that you kill somebody's son or you kill somebody's parent, and they're not going to be willing to back away. They'll pick up a gun and come after you.
Japanese can do it. They're now some of the most democratic members of the world community. So I think there's proof. There's some compelling proof there that isn't necessarily true.
Tom, just a question as an outsider. You're talking about graphic images and pointing the finger at Israel, but what about the graphic images of the 1,200 that were killed by Hamas?
I just want to say, Abe, your presentation is just riveting, and this whole discussion is so important. Thank you, Perry, all of you. Anyway, let's go back to the history of Israel, and its first prime minister was Golda Meir.
No,
and she was a woman.
No, it was Ben.
Yeah. Subsequently, it was Golda Meir. And I think that what people are missing in this Islam versus Jew is, and I hate to sound gender biased, but Islam, much of it, has a real problem with women. And I know that the non-militants will say, it's a religion of peace, but look at the spread of Islam and look at what's happening to women around the world. And I think that what's happening here is you need to get the grandmothers on both sides, these women who've lost sons and grandsons and daughters, and say, sorry, fuck you guys, we want to live, and put your weapons down. I'm sorry. I'm very passionate about this.
I wish with all of my heart that it was that simple, that the grandmothers and mothers would get together and create the peace that we all so badly yearn for. But unfortunately, we live in a real world where there is hate, may it be religious or for other reasons. and and we have no choice. We look at we, the Jewish people, are fighting for survival. The state of Israel
Yes.
is fighting for survival. The Arabs
Yes.
are fighting for conquest. What is it that the
Yes.
Arabs and Arabs want? They want there not to be a Jewish state in their midst. So we have this powerful weapon, and that is survival, the instinct to survive. And that instinct to survive is going to carry us through. It's going to not be without cost. There already has been a horrifying cost. The tears that are being shed on both sides are heartbreaking. But unfortunately, the, this is what we are as a species. And, I jokingly say that when we vaccinate our babies against the polio and measles and all the other childhood diseases, maybe we can come up with a vaccine that'll make children immune to hate. Because until then, I don't see much hope that our species is not going to be at war at one time or another. And war is ugly, it's horrible, it's tragic, it leaves so many lives shattered. I can't tell you the number of young Israelis that are laying in the hospitals with legs and arms blown off, and Palestinians as well. And it's tragic. But unfortunately, war becomes the only answer to deal with hate. There is no other way to deal with to deal with those that want to see you dead.
An island.
That's what the Palestinians want. They want to see the Jewish people. Hamas has it right in their charter. The destruction of the state of Israel and all its Jews is right in their charter. So Iran publicly calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. So how do you deal with people like that? You have to, peace comes through strength, and that strength has to be a bigger gun. You don't take a knife to a gunfight. You just got to get a bigger gun, unfortunately. But that is the human condition. I have no other explanation.
Well, I think you brought it to the fore. If one party says, until you're annihilated, we will continue to say no. Vahed, go ahead. You're if I'm not mistaken, you're from Iran. I'm not okay. We got a technical issue there, Vahed, but he did put a note on chat, and he was saying it's not the Iranian people that we should fear or we should be angry with. It's the Revolutionary Guard, the theocracy, those that are in fact in control of Iran and the Iranian people. But so be it. I mean, I studied Iran when I was in college, and it was just before the revolution when Reza Pahlavi was overthrown. But yeah, we've got problems in the Middle East in several of the nations where autocracies rule.
The Iranian people are pro-West and pro-Israel for sure. Yeah. It's the theocracy leadership in Iran that's the problem. They are messianic. They believe that they are that they have a mission in the world. Look, I don't mean to drop names here, but I had lunch in Tel Aviv a few years ago with a former head of Israel military intelligence, and he said to me, the leaders during the Cold War, the Americans and the Russians understood the consequence of mutual assured destruction. The theocracy in Iran doesn't understand that. They're messianic. They believe that they have a purpose on Earth, and they're prepared to sacrifice 3, 4, 500 million Muslims in order to advance that goal. That is a mentality that is impossible to deal with through negotiations. If you like them or you don't like them, you hate them, or you don't hate them. Trump had the right idea, starve them to death, cut off their oil exports, and place embargoes on them and starve them to death. That's what has to be done with Iran. The Iranian people have to they have to dislodge the theocracy in Iran. That's the only way Iran can be brought back into the community. And a nuclear Iran changes everything in the world, not only for Israel, but for everyone in the world is going to be affected by Iran nuclear.
Okay, let's see if you're,
Yeah,
go.
I'm originally Iranian, so I lived in that country for I don't know for decades. So I know, like Perry, you and most of the Western media looks into the Israel and Palestine issue like a kind of simple academia negotiation problem, but actually it's not that, because the bigger issue is this Islamic regime in Iran. Like they like when Khomeini got power in Iran back in 1979, right a few months after that, he started saying that we should wipe out Israel from the map of the world. Like how now, like with this strategy, with this approach that Islamic regime has started, now we see a lot of Western country, mostly like in the US, like not the Republican, like the other groups,
Right.
they think that Islamic regime is a kind of like pro-democracy. No, honestly, it's not. But now at the same time, Biden administration or other people is starting supporting that Islamic regime, who supply all these arms to Hamas. Now you're talking about getting rid of the Hamas. Abe says about like we need to get rid of the Hamas, but it's not only Hamas. After Hamas, you will start encountering with Hezbollah, with all of those proxy groups that are there in the region. So I mean, until you don't get rid of this Islamic regime in Iran, you will have that unrest, like crazy super unrest situation in Middle East. And I think like Netanyahu started negotiating with, like started have meeting with the with Iran, with the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son. So in last summer, I think that's the right approach. You should bring back the peaceful times of the Middle East, which was like before 1979. The root cause of the oldest issue in the region is that Islamic regime in Iran.
Well, I mean, the Janissaries have existed from the Middle Ages. There are sects, religious sects in the Middle East that are adamant that violence is the only option for the solution. And peace is never going to be at 100%. You're always going to have some need for defense. But what we have right now is such a high degree of violence as executed on October 7th that a party has to step up. I'm not sure what the option would have been to step back and say, peace was clearly not going to be an answer. But Abe, you may want to step in here. But very good point, Vahed. Thank you very much for sharing that. Clearly, the issues with Iran rest with the ruling party, not with the people themselves.
Getting enough information out of Iran with social media and what have you, to be able to determine pretty accurately that the majority of the Iranian people do not support the Iranian leadership. And there's no doubt that they are the impetus for so much of the violence in the Middle East. Look what they've done with the Houthis in Yemen, all of the proxies in Syria and in Iraq. And who's suffering? It's the civilians. It's innocent civilians that suffer, because when the Americans or the British send in the F-35s to bomb sites in Syria or Iraq or Yemen, I can guarantee you that there are civilians that are dying. So yes, Iran is the impetus for so much of the violence, and only America can deal effectively with that problem. And right now, American leadership is not inclined to do so. And I'm afraid that it may be to the detriment of the world if the Iranian ambitions are not confronted in the most severe kind of ways.
Kevin, you had another comment you wanted to make?
A couple of things. First of all, I would like to present the notion that a measure of a truly advanced civilization is its ability to resolve conflict. And I would be interested to hear Abe's comment on that. And the context is in a lot of work that's been done over the last several decades around truth and reconciliation in many countries in many contexts. And I would like to hear Abe's perspective on that.
So I think if you look at the last almost 80 years of Israel's existence, you have to come to the conclusion that Israel has made incredible efforts to reach some sort of accommodations with its neighbors, and they've had success. In 1978, after several wars with Egypt and others, the president of Egypt came to Jerusalem and said, "Yes, it's enough. Let's sign peace." And Israel has enjoyed a peace agreement with Egypt since 1978. Now, what they have is a peace that involves no shooting. There's no love lost between the Egyptian people and the Israeli people, for sure. But at least they're not shooting at each other. The same thing can be said for Jordan. King Hussein in 1995 signed a peace agreement with the state of Israel, and Jordan and Israel has had no shooting war since. So, and then of course the Abraham Accords. So Israel goes through extraordinary lengths to try and develop peaceful relationships with its neighbors. But when its neighbors said no, they're not interested in recognizing the legitimacy of a Jewish state, the one and only Jewish state in the world. There is 23 Christian states, there's 51 Muslim states, there's 16 Hindu states, and there's 17 Buddhist states, and one little Jewish state. And the state is, you could put 10 Israels into the province of Alberta. That's how small it is. And the Palestinians have yet to say, yes, we accept the existence of the nation state of the Jewish people. So until that happens, the hope for peace between the Israelis and Palestinians they're not very hopeful, unfortunately. That has to be the first step.
The most outstanding illustration of conflict being resolved, Abe referred to earlier, which was the atomic bomb and what took place in Germany. You know, that was not a rather peaceful way to bring it about. But no matter where truth and reconciliation has been attempted, it's ultimately economic reconciliation that brings a long-standing peace. And I think we've got to keep that in mind, even as it relates to the indigenous population in Canada. Where we're making headway is when we begin to establish a more sustainable economy. And we haven't talked about that, Abe, so you might want to elaborate on what's the possibility of, if Palestine is ever going to be sustainable, that it can have an economy either supported with Israel as a partnership or on its own.
Definitely we can have an economy. Palestinian people are very talented and can build a sustainable economy. Of course, the world would need to help. And again, if you like them or not, or hate them or not, Trump did provide the Palestinian people with a path to a state and $50 billion to bring up the standard of living in Gaza and the West Bank to the same standards of Israel, and it could have been done. Of course, the answer was no. Ambassador of the United Nations, Abe even once famously said, "The Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity." Every time they've been given opportunity to improve the lives of their people, and they've said no. And they have to. So the title of this conversation is "How do we get to yes?" Well, you get to yes when the side that keeps saying no starts saying yes. That's when you get to yes. And that's what the world has to do. You know, maybe it's time, instead of pressuring Israel to accept a two-state solution, maybe it's time to pressure the Palestinians to accept a Jewish state. You know, that may be a strategy that may work better. You know, Albert Einstein famously said that if you do the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different solution, it's a clear sign of insanity. And that's what we have. We have a state of insanity because we keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, and that is to try and get the Palestinians to say yes.
Well, if in negotiations one party only brings no to the table, you haven't even started negotiations.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
Uh,
And if that party makes it a condition coming to the table to release prisoners who have been tried and convicted of attempted murder and murder as a condition of coming to the table, that's also an non-start. That's not going to happen again. It happened too often. It's not going to happen again.
well, I'm going to let Sharon pose her closing question.
So thank you, Abe. This is the history that you bring to enlighten us here today is so deep, and I'm reluctant to ask the question from a Wester's point of view that's poorly educated in next door to you. So, but I do have a question here, which I understand says that there is a split among leadership within Israel, and Netanyahu, of course, on the deep right side, and then. And there is other representation open to not reconciliation, perhaps, but a pause. And they are now talking further with the United States on that topic, on that side of things. There's a split in the leadership, with Netanyahu definitely on one side, others definitely on the other side of his.
Okay, so let me quickly talk a little bit about Israeli politics. Israel, in its 80 years of history, has never had any one party form a government. Governments have only been formed in Israel through coalition. So there's been a coalition of those on center left and those on center right. So before, if you recall, in the last 3 years, 4 years, there's been 5 elections in Israel. So every election was non-conclusive because the Israeli electorate, like so much many in the free world, are divided between left and right. So the former government was considered a left-wing coalition led by Yair Lapid. And the balance of power always exists in a small party with 3 or 4 members who can bring down the government anytime. So under Yair Lapid, the balance of power was held by anti-Zionist Arab. It was called the Arab List. There was 11 members of that coalition that were Israeli Arabs. Many of them were anti-Zionist. The Netanyahu right-wing government that was elected last year is the balance of power is held by the ultra-Orthodox, what's called the Haredim, our version of the crazies. Okay, they are very religious and they have their own idea of how Judaism should be practiced, and they hold the balance of power. So Israelis and Jews have a dilemma. Who would we rather see govern Israel? A left-wing party with the control in the hands of anti-Zionist Arabs, or the right-wing party with the balance of power in the hands of the ultra-religious? It's a awful dilemma. And so far, in the last, well, since 1977, when Menachem Begin broke the hold of the left wing parties who held power from 1948 to 1977. Since 1977, most of the governments have been right-leaning governments in Israel, because up to 1977, Israel was not a free market society. It was controlled by the Israel's only union, the Histadrut, that owned and operated all of the big industries. And it was Menachem Begin who broke that union and created a free market capitalistic society in Israel that has flourished since 1977. It's a world leader in technology and medicine and agriculture, and people have gotten rich. There are many very well-to-do Israelis, and Israel is considered to be a first world country in terms of its economy. So those are the choices: left wing or right wing, and the center. It just doesn't, like in the United States or even in Canada, the center doesn't have the loudest voice. Unfortunately, the loudest voices are either on the right or on the left.
So getting the yes. Clearly, if one party is not prepared to bring anything to the table other than no, we haven't begun negotiations, and we've got a ways yet to go.
Okay, and for the pause that Sharon alluded to, yes, there is a lot of pressure on Israel for a ceasefire. Many want a permanent ceasefire, which is not going to happen. Many want a temporary ceasefire. If you recall, there was a ceasefire and exchange in exchange for hostages. There was about 50 hostages that were released in early December. But right now, the Hamas is not prepared to accept any kind of a deal. It almost appears as though they want they have a death wish, and in the meantime, innocent Palestinians are dying, and the aid that they so desperately need is that is flowing into Gaza. Hamas is grabbing a lot of it. Unfortunately, it's not getting to those that desperately need it. So, can there be Israel has agreed to pauses? Israel will agree to pause to let humanitarian goods to come in, but they're not going to agree to a permanent ceasefire and allow Hamas to survive. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much the world yells and screams and how much they condemn us for innocent deaths and what have you. It is a matter of survival. We are in survival mode, and we cannot survive as a people in the world without a strong and vibrant state of the Jewish people. And the only way that we can ensure the survival of the Jewish people in this world is to ensure that those that hate us and want to kill us are met with overwhelming force. For those of you in the audience who don't believe that, then you are not students of history, the history of the world. If you study the history of the world, you'll clearly say that is the only way that peace ultimately comes to any country, is when those that want to kill you are overwhelmed. You got to take a bigger gun to a gunfight, not a knife. I want to thank everybody for listening to me. My time is free time. I don't charge anything for my presentation. Anybody that would like to invite me to come and speak to the groups that they're part of, please don't hesitate to call and let me know, and I'm happy to come. And thank you, everybody. And I hope that my words have left you with something to think about. Thank you. Thank you, Perry.
Well,
Thank you, Perry.
I hope, like I think we all do, that mankind will find its way to some element of peace. So